All right, guys, so we got one quick section today. We're just going to talk about watersheds. I know this unit's a little bit all over the place, but these are some important things we need to kind of understand before we can move into the rest of the unit. So, our learning objective today will be to describe the characteristics of a watershed, and your FRQ will be to explain environmental concepts, processes, or models in applied contexts. So, as we get going, just understand that a watershed is, I mean, even though it has water in the name, it's actually land. So it's all of the land that's going to drain into a specific body of water, like a river, a lake, or a bay. This is going to be determined by the slope of the area. And so when I say slope, you can kind of imagine this land as just like a giant funnel that's draining into a body of water because of gravity. So with the slope, that's how the ridges of the land are going to be oriented. So if it were to rain here on this light green or yellow, whatever color you want to consider that, um, then because of gravity, it's going to run down towards this river here. But if it were to fall on that dark green section behind the dotted line, gravity would pull it to a different body of water. So, some other things that are going to affect watersheds and how they run is going to be vegetation, soil composition, and slope. So, the more vegetation we have, that's going to slow down how quick the water can run downhill. So, that's going to allow for more infiltration. So, more water is actually going to be absorbed into the ground, and then it's going to be able to pass into those um, groundwater areas and recharge our groundwater. Obviously, the steeper an area is, so the greater slope it has, the faster that water is going to be able to run down the slope. This can lead to more soil erosion, so more things will be picked up as the water makes its way from the top of the slope to the bottom. And then the third one's going to be soil permeability. So this is just how much water can actually be absorbed into the soil. So if we have very permeable soil, more water is going to be absorbed. So infiltration is going to increase and runoff is going to decrease. But if our soil is very compact and it's not very permeable, then we're going to see more runoff happening. And that vegetation can help with that permeability. As the roots expand into the soil, it's going to increase that permeability and allow more water to infiltrate. And obviously, human activities, we've focused on those a lot in this class. So, human activities are going to impact the quality of the water that's making it into the body of water from the watershed. So, things like agriculture, clear cutting, urbanization, dams, mining, those are all going to impact the quality of the water. Okay, so as water's running from cities, more trash, more pollutants might be picked up. If it's running from farms, we might see fertilizers being picked up. So, what this water has to work through before it gets to the body of water is going to determine the quality of the water. So, we're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So, this is a really huge region. Let's move that out of the way. That actually has 6 different states that are going to drain into these streams, rivers, and eventually into the Chesapeake Bay. Now we are talking about the Chesapeake Bay, even though we don't, really live near the Chesapeake Bay. We aren't a part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, but it's a really good study of ecosystem services and the value that those things can provide us. So just to recap, to remember that the Chesapeake Bay, it's going to be a mix of fresh and salt water, so it's going to be an estuary. So between that mix of the fresh and salt water and all the nutrients that are in those sediments there, the salt marshes that are shown in this picture here, so you've got your grasses, you've got your water, these are going to be highly productive ecosystems. So if we were to influence this watershed in any type of way, that could have some really negative impacts for the Chesapeake Bay. So, just as a reminder, ecosystem services provide some kind of monetary value for us. So, a lot of people travel to the Chesapeake Bay. It's beautiful there. So, revenue from tourism, so hotels, restaurants, fishing permits, crabbing permits, water filtration. So, the grass, those roots are going to trap pollutants before they can enter the water itself. These ecosystems are really good habitats for food sources like fish and crabs, shown in that picture there. And so, not only are we getting the food, but we have to think about the money that the fishermen are getting from catching the food, the money that the restaurants are making from selling the food. So, quite a big money maker there. And then storm protection. So, these are going to be really vital in protecting from large storms. They're able to really absorb extra water and buffer floods so they don't affect the surrounding area as bad. And then just remember that tourism. So that's what that picture is supposed to represent. Okay, so people paying to come, kayak through the beautiful Bay Area. So let's talk about some human impacts on the Chesapeake Bay in particular. One of the biggest ones is going to be nutrient pollution. So that's going to be those nitrogen and phosphorus molecules leading to eutrophication in the bay. I know we've talked about eutrophication before, but just as a reminder, it's an algal bloom that we get because we have too much nitrogen and phosphorus, which leads to decreased sunlight. So we can see that happening down here. We can see our nutrient and contaminant loading leading to this algae bloom. So remember that nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus tend to be limiting factors for algae. So when we input a lot of those into the ecosystem, we see huge amounts of growth, which sounds like it might be a good thing, but in reality, it's not. So that algae is going to block out the sun from the waters below. So the plants that are below the surface are going to die. And then when they die, the bacteria that are in the water are going to use up all the oxygen in the water while they're decomposing those dead plants. And this is a positive feedback loop, remember? As they use up the oxygen, more things die, and then as they break them down, they use up more oxygen, and so it just makes the cycle worse and worse and worse. And this leads to hypoxia, which is just low oxygen, and dead zones where nothing can live. So, some major nitrogen and phosphorus sources from humans that are heading into the Chesapeake Bay. Number one, discharge from sewage treatment plants. So, that's actually the nitrogen and phosphorus levels from human waste ending up in the waterways. Now, these systems do their best, they try, but they can never get those numbers to zero. It's just not easy to do. Then we're going to have our animal waste from CAFOs, which are concentrated animal feeding operations. So a lot of times they will have what they call manure lagoons, which can overflow, or if they're not lined well, can seep into the ground. And then synthetic fertilizer from agricultural fields and lawns. We've already kind of talked about that. So it's the main sources here are going to be human waste and then agriculture. There you go. Some other big pollutants, endocrine disruptors. So that's actually going to be like when you take certain medicines, they can't be completely used by your body. There will be some things that are released in your waste, and those are sometimes difficult to get out in water treatment plants. And then sediment pollution is another really big one. So as we deforest areas for urbanization or we till ag fields, we mix up a lot of the soil, which allows erosion to happen. So you can see um, ooh, in this picture here, this is what like a healthy rocky bottom stream should look like. So all these rocks down here provide all these little crevices and nooks and crannies for macroinvertebrates, which these fish are going to feed on. But if we have too many sediments entering that water, then all those rocks kind of get covered, and that takes away the habitat, which is a major food source for our fish. Some other things that can result from sediment pollution we're going to see an increase in turbidity. So that's just more particles in the water, so not as much sun can get into the water, which is going to cause reduced photosynthesis levels. We're also going to see the water being warmer because it has a lower albedo. So as it has a lower albedo, more sun, um, not the sunlight, but the energy from the sun's rays are going to be absorbed into that water, which make the water warmer. So some effects of clear cutting on watersheds. We're going to see when we start to clear cut and cut these giant swatches of forest down, we're going to have a very large decrease in the stabilization of the soil because the roots of those trees are actually kind of holding all the soil together and making it so it's not able to be eroded as easily. So that's going to increase sedimentation. So then we're going to also, as that soil erodes, we're going to see organic matter and nutrients getting removed from the forest, and those sediments ending up in local streams. So like I said, that's going to increase our stream temp, but it's also going to increase our soil temp because as we lose those trees provide shade cover for not only um, the area where they were growing, but also if they grow over the edge of water, they provide shade for that water as well. So that clear cutting is going to have a lot of negative effects from sedimentation to increased temperature of the land and the water. So just overall, not a good thing. All right, so some potential solutions that we could have to these watershed pollutions. We'll start with A and C. So, A is something called cover crops. We'll talk about those more a little later in the year, but essentially it's just planting some other crop in between the main crop planting and harvesting season. So, it's going to hold on to those nutrients, it's going to hold on to the water, and not just let the nutrients be pushed off into our waterways. Another thing here with C is that animal manure management. So this is meant to be one of those like manure lagoons I was telling you about. So a couple things we can do there. We can line them better. We can give them a little bit steeper berms or edges to prevent them from overflowing, which obviously would reduce the amount of nutrients entering our waterways. The next thing we can do to help reduce watershed pollutants are planting riparian buffers. So, a riparian area is just the area right along the edge of a waterway. And so, if we actually have plants there instead of just open soil, those roots are going to be able to allow more water to infiltrate into the soil, and then the roots will be able to filter out some of those pollutants before the water makes its way into the main uh, water source, whether it's a stream or a river or whatever. And then moving over here, so we've got D and F, which are both focused here on human waste. So we can have septic tank upgrades where we design our drain fields to allow that water to drain a little more effectively into the soil and be filtered before it enters the groundwater. At our sewage treatment plants, a lot of plants are using biological nutrient removal. So they're actually putting microbes into the water, which are kind of eating up the waste and everything like that to prevent those nutrients from ending up in the waterways. E, this is showing you what we call a stormwater pond. So in a lot of areas now, these are mandatory for new construction over a certain size. So the rainwater will actually run off into this pond. So that pond will do a lot of the collecting of, salts from the roads or fertilizers from people's yards or whatever. And so the water goes into that pond and the water is able to be filtered before it gets sent to a main water source. And then our practice FRQ today. Deforestation can affect water quality. Identify one change that can occur in the water quality of streams within a watershed that has been deforested. Explain how deforestation can lead to this change.